Joining us now to analyze the coverage, Beverly Hallberg, president of District Media Group and a former TV and radio producer. Emily Jashinsky, culture editor at The Federalist. And Richard Fowler, radio talk show host and Fox News contributor. Emily, the New York Times story says that days after the Coleman firing, according to sources, law enforcement officials became so concerned by the president's behavior that they began investigating whether he had been working on behalf of Russia against American interests, but nothing was found. Big story?
Well, so I searched this link on Twitter this morning to see what various journalists were saying about it. And I have to say, there's this incredible eagerness among journalists to see this more as an indictment of Donald Trump than of the FBI. And you get 9 paragraphs down into the New York Times report, and there's a note right there that says, there's no public evidence has emerged to suggest that Donald Trump was taking direction from the Russian government. 9 paragraphs down in this
I counted them as well. Good math on your part. Let me ask Richard. So the president called into Judge Jeanine Pirro's show on Fox last night, and he said of this New York Times story, I think it's the most insulting article I've ever had written. If you read the article, you see they found absolutely nothing. And here's the 9th paragraph. No evidence has emerged publicly that Mr. Trump was secretly in contact with or took direction from Russian government officials. Your thoughts?
Well, a couple things on this. I think it all comes down to what's in the Mueller investigation, what's in the Mueller report. This was one investigation, and I think folks need to remember.
Mueller has now taken over.
Right, Mueller's taken it all over, and folks need to remember that the FBI is 2 parts. Part of it is counterintelligence, which is they work to make sure they protect our trade secrets and they protect all the other stuff, and the other part is criminal. And a counterintelligence investigation is very different from a criminal investigation.
It's a real shocker when you think about it, but on the other hand, graded as a news story. How important is it?
Well, I don't think any of these, like when you think of all the news stories regarding Russia, I don't think any of them are of any importance because the Mueller team has not leaked anything, number one.
Right.
And number two, so if it's not based on a court filing from the Mueller report or from the Mueller team, then I give it a little bit less credibility. Okay. But Mueller is where the credibility lives.
Beverly, the Washington Post story says the president on several occasions concealed the details of his face-to-face encounters with Vladimir Putin. On one occasion, taking possession of the notes his own interpreter had made and instructing the interpreter not to discuss what had transpired with other administration officials. That's very unusual. But how damaging is it? Emily talked about a narrative, media narrative.
I think it's damaging from a media narrative perspective for this reason. So I think when Trump says that there has been no collusion, and that of course is what mainstream media wants to attach him to, he doesn't help himself out by having notes not recorded of these meetings. I understand for national security, we don't want everything released to the media. But if he really wants to help himself, now plenty of his meetings were recorded with Putin. He did have Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary of State, come out. But I think for his own credibility and these stories that continue to come out, they want to damage him based on some supposed collusion and connection with Russia. He should realize that and be above bar and realize I got to be careful with these.
Okay, but here's a reason why the president might not want him to share the details. Buried deep in the story is a reference to it. Worried about leaks. This story itself is an example of that, as is all those stories that were leaked about his phone conversations with world leaders, Australia, Mexico, sometimes transcripts were released. Maybe he just doesn't trust the people around him. The president told Jeanine Pirro, I don't care, I'm happy to have this stuff released. All right, let's go back to all of the media hype surrounding the Oval Office address. What did you make, as we saw at the top, of commentators and anchors, not just commentators, accusing the president of outright lying before he even delivers the speech? Well,
it's just sort of this perfect exhibition of the media's treatment of Donald Trump, right, which is that they assume all of these various things about Donald Trump. And in some cases, he absolutely does have problems trafficking in straight facts. There's just no question about that, and it's absolutely true. But
well, as one quick example, he said that the former president supported him on the border wall. All the living ex-presidents have come out and said that that's not true.
Right. So there are clear-cut examples, but when they do things like this, they muddy the waters in a way that is not helpful to the public. And the fact-checking of the speech before and after was so unhelpful. I literally could not believe what I read in the New York Times fact check. Some of the fact checks were unbelievable. Like just the things that they rated misleading were, like how X number of illegal aliens had crossed the border.
But some things in that message were misleading. First of all, the president said that that Mexico is going to pay for this this wall, and then he gave some convoluted
Absolutely.
example of if we pass this trade
Absolutely.
deal, which is not done, has not been ratified, all of a sudden the U.S. Treasury is going to come up with $25 billion to
Absolutely
pay for
agree.
the wall.
Absolutely agree
And
with
that's
that.
not factual.
I agree.
Since you
I
brought
agree.
that up, we actually happen to have the soundbite. This is going out of order, folks. And so here's what the president said about, after repeatedly saying during the campaign, we could play the tape all day long. Mexico will pay for the wall. Here's what he had to say, challenging news reports on that subject.
I know the fake news likes to say it. When during the campaign, I would say Mexico's going to pay for it. Obviously, I never said this, and I never meant they're going to write out a check. I said they're going to pay for it.
Well, and so now he says it's the trade deal, which is indirect. Okay, so that's a bit of a stretch, and he's blaming the press. But at the same time, journalists should hold the president accountable, should point out inconsistencies, misrepresentations. But what's going on now with all the lying being thrown around, it seems to be on a whole different level.
Oh, there's a complete double standard. Let's remind ourselves, this was the first Oval Office address. There were even discussions whether or not they wanted to cover it to even begin with.
What did you think of that? The fact that there was this debate about whether the president should get airtime, and people and journalists would come on and say, well, we shouldn't even carry it because we know he's going to lie, or we shouldn't carry it live. We should first point out all the lies.
Because this is what it is. It's more about they hate him so much. The office of the presidency should deserve the respect of this being taped and being recorded and being covered. You would never hear this by President Obama. This is his first Oval Office address. I actually think one of the reasons why they decided to cover it was so that they could talk about the wall of misinformation, which was a term that they used, and Democrats use that as well, but also because you had the rebuttal by Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. So they figured this would be good TV, but I think this should have been a given. It's a 7-minute address. You show this because it's such a concerning issue in the country.
So Beverly, in most cases, I agree. I think that the president's Oval Office address should be covered by all the news outlets. The difference here is this was not a unifying address. Remember when George W. Bush?
Whether it was or it
No,
wasn't.
but there's a distinction. When you sit behind the Resolute desk and you give
You're just
a national
hold on.
address.
You're criticizing the speech, and that's fine. You have every right to criticize the speech, but we're talking about whether he should have gotten 9 minutes of broadcast network airtime.
Well, here's the problem with this, right, where I think networks question whether or not they should give him broadcast coverage. And the reason being is that because it was not an address where the president was like, where in George W. Bush 9/11 was like, we all got to come together. Here's what's happening next. This was a campaign speech that he gave for 7 minutes.
All right. I think you're undercutting your own point. But let me go on to another soundbite. The president, of course, had a subsequent meeting with Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. He walked out. There was a dispute about the facts. Here's the soundbite.
I didn't pound on tables. I didn't raise my voice. That was a lie. I don't have temper tantrums. I really don't. But it plays to his narrative, but it's a lie.
So he is blaming the fake news there and the media narrative, but this is not anonymous sources say. Right. By the way, there's no dispute that he walked out. He said bye-bye. He didn't pound the table.
Right.
They were quoting the Democratic leaders on the record, journalists were.
Yep, absolutely. I think that is the key here, is that this is perfectly newsworthy when it is on the record from two sources that happen to be the leaders of the Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate. So I think it's fair. I don't know if it's true, but I think it's fair, and I think it's fair for the president to come on the record and rebut it. Absolutely.
Okay. There has been a media freak out over the president saying, almost making it imminent, that he's going to use emergency powers to get funding from other agencies, namely the military, to fund the wall. And then for now, he says he's not going to do that. Lindsey Graham said he spoke to the president this morning, went on Fox News Sunday and said he'd rather make a deal. But do you think the media criticism of this, including from National Review, about what a stretch of executive power that would be, may have been a factor in the president deciding to hold off, at least for now?
I think that was. I think it was a big deal. Not only did he have criticism from conservative press, but he also had criticism from senators on the House, Republican senators, are like, you cannot do this, because we all know if you want to get money for this wall, come to Congress and actually let's make a deal. There is room for a deal to be done, but the president has to be willing to move off of this idea that he's going to get $5 billion for his wall no matter what.
Right. Well, there may be a deal to be made, but both sides are pretty dug in right now. And what Republicans are saying is if you use your powers to declare an emergency, what's to stop a Democratic president from doing that for some liberal priorities? All right, let me get a break ahead.